Dr Iain James from the ECB and Scott Hawkins. Matt, we'll make a start. I think we've got several people in with us. It's 7:32, so we'll kick off. Just for those joining us, just some housekeeping really. Please try to keep your cameras off so we have maximum capacity on Zoom this evening. Please make sure you're on mute. And just to let you know, the presentation webinar will be recorded. So Matt will circulate this tomorrow or Monday, including the questions from the chat function. Obviously, using Zoom tonight, we do have the chat function, and we're very, very keen for you to use that chat function, post some questions, get talking to each other, and hopefully you'll be learning from each other within that chat function. In the chat function tonight, we've got two of our supporters. So Simon Johnson from the GMA Grounds Management Association, he's our regional pitch advisor. Some of you may have already come across Simon, had advice, support and guidance from him. So he's in the chat function to pick up any questions, as is Dave Cobb, who's one of our support groundsmen for Somerset Grounds Association. He's also in the chat function to pick up any questions you might have. We do have a large number of questions to get through tonight, but to make this as interactive as possible, what we're going to try to do is pick out 2 or 3 live questions and pose them to both Scott and Iain, and hopefully answer those questions live on tonight's webinar. As with all webinars, it's really important that we finish at 8:30. You've probably all got somewhere, I was going to say to be, but either dinner or drinks or a TV program to watch at 8:30. So we are going to stick to time, and we will not run over any time. Okay, so what we're going to cover tonight, the Somerset Grounds Association relaunch 2021. A sneak peek behind the scenes look at the Cooper Association's County Ground winter programme and the autumn renovations. And then the main bulk of this evening is our Q&A with Iain and Scott, picking up your questions, both the ones that you've been submitted earlier in registration and again live on tonight's webinar. And then we're going to touch on the Grounds Management Association GMA toolkit and the education platform that's available to you as a community and elite groundsman. Just some introductions. My name is John Bendel. I'm a volunteer within the community game, and I'm part of the Somerset Grounds Association. So I'm your host for this evening. I'm purely the host. I'll be comparing and inviting Iain and Scott to do the majority of answering of the questions. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce both Scott and Dr Iain James, if they could come on screen for me. Scott, good evening. Welcome.
Evening, John.
You've had probably 4 months of rain. Last 10 days, you've had some nice warm sunshine. What have you been up to for the last 10 days?
So yeah, the sunshine of the last 10 days has really helped us. We had a bit of rain yesterday, which has set us back a little bit. The puddle on the outfield's returned, but yeah, we managed to start pre-season prep. We've got nets due to start on Monday morning. First team out here at the county ground, so we're all systems go for that, hopefully.
Brilliant. So it's great to have a bit of sunshine and a bit of warmth. And Dr Iain James, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, John. Good evening, all. So,
Iain, Head of Facility Services, ECB. Can you enlighten us what that title means and what you do? And secondly, give the audience some insight into kind of your background and how you got to the ECB.
Sure. So Head of Facilities Services, we're a team within the Facilities Department that are set up to help cricket facilities. So whether it's grounds, built facilities, from small clubs like mine right up to the county grounds and international grounds. So yeah, it's good. It's a lot of COVID at the moment, unfortunately. I'm looking forward to a time after COVID. So I joined the ECB in April 2020, hence all the COVID. But before that, I was technical director at TGMS, who are sports surface consultants. So we did a lot of consultancy in and around grounds like Taunton, the Oval, Old Trafford, Lords, but also other sports, so designing rugby grounds, tennis courts, working for Wimbledon, places like that. And before I did that, I was an academic at Cranfield University, where I was leading the research students who were doing the rolling trials and the aeration trials for the ECB and various other things that looking at how people get injured playing sport. So
brilliant. And I believe you're also a community groundsman at Olney Cricket Club.
yeah, that's right. That's what's behind me. Doesn't quite look like that at the moment, but this is what happens when you have lockdown and you can spend a bit of time on your ground, I think. But yeah, very small budgets, small machinery shed, and lots of people wanting to play cricket.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you very much. We're going to come back to you both in a moment. I've got a couple of slides to go through, and then we'll come back to you shortly, okay? So what I want to cover next, just for 30 seconds, is just to give the audience an update on where the Somerset Grounds Association is and the work it's been doing over the last 4 to 5 months over the winter of 2020. So we basically drawn this diagram to bring to life what the association offers to member clubs within Somerset. So starting in the top right-hand corner, the added value and procurement, that's around how do we maximise commercial partnerships for our community clubs? How do we provide materials, so loam, fertilizer, seed, at competitive prices for our member clubs? And we're working hard behind the scenes with some potential suppliers to bring that to the fore in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Our member services, moving around the sphere, is around member engagement. How do we engage with our members? So our webinar program is a really good example. It's our first kind of bite of the cherry in terms of moving our member services section forward, but also platforms such as Twitter and Facebook and member groups that can actually really help the education and support of community groundsmen. And then the advice and guide section is we're looking at developing the resource on the ground to support club grounds people in terms of advice and guidance. So club visits or just a helping hand telephone conversation with some of our grounds team supporters. And then moving to the top sphere around the ground services and delivery. The Grounds Association have always had a renowned and well-respected end of season renovation trader scheme. So that's how do we enhance that and also then add to the aeration program post the renovation scheme. So they're the 4 sections of the Grounds Association that we just wanted to draw your attention to. And I know our colleagues in Cornwall have got a very similar association. I wouldn't say we're copying it, but we're just modernising what we're slightly doing in Somerset just to keep up and catch up. So with moving forward, we're really keen to understand tonight who we've got with us. So I'm going to ask Matt just to launch a very quick poll just for 30 seconds. So what role do you play within pitch maintenance? Are you a volunteer grounds person, a paid grounds person, a contractor, or a club committee member? This just helps us understand who we're talking to tonight, who we could potentially engage with, and it also helps Scott and Simon understand who they're answering questions for later on. So a couple more seconds. It's great. We've got 69% of club volunteer grounds persons. We've got some paid grounds persons as well. We've got a contractor with us, and also good to see we've got some committee members. So just 5 more seconds, and then we'll close off the results. Okay, thanks, Matt. Brilliant. So the majority, nearly 70% of us are volunteer grounds persons with us. So Matt, if we could stop sharing. Okay, I'm going to invite Scott to come back with us, please. He's back in the room. Brilliant. Scott, the next 15 minutes, the floor is yours. So, ladies and gents, we're very, very privileged to have Scott with us tonight. You're going to have a sneak peek behind the scenes of what Scott's been up to over the close season, end of season renovations going through the winter. So I'll be quiet. Scott, 15 minutes, all yours.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. If you just flick onto the next one so we can have a nice picture of Taunton there in the sunshine. That was the just before the first ball of the return of first class cricket to Taunton, that photo. I was snuck up in the stands and took that photo. Tonight I'm just going to do a little overview of our square and outfield renovations here at the county ground in Taunton from last September, October. So our pre-season, sort of, you may be asking, why am I doing a renovations one in a pre-season webinar? But our pre-season, our planning for the next season starts towards the end of the season before. You know, our end of season renovations is the major, most important factor when it comes to what the pitches are going to be like the following year. So we put a lot of planning into our renovations. Not always goes to plan, as you'll find out in a bit. And say the sort of the putting the square to bed sort of mantra doesn't really work for us anymore. We don't sort of pack up at the end of September and come back in March and sort of start again. We manage both the square and the outfield quite intensively throughout the whole of the winter. I say the cricket season is getting longer, so we're starting in March and we're finishing in October. So our renovation window and our good weather is definitely a shorter period, and we're sort of having to grow outfields back and squares back in colder conditions and trying to get them ready earlier. So it's becoming more of a challenge. I say we had the added challenge this year of the COVID and furlough. So from the day after the renovations finished, all of the ground staff except myself were on furlough. They didn't return until the end of January. So that's been an additional challenge that come with this particular winter. Say I'll go through the square renovations first. The square renovations, we looked at a more intensive renovation than normal, based partly due to the fact because of the lockdown and we didn't play as many games and had unused pitches. We actually tried to, because those pitches weren't thinned out and used in the use like they would do for matches. We decided to kind of go with a total surface removal with the Coro field tap maker. We used the 10mm universe rotor because of our hybrid pitches, the CIS hybrid pitches. That's a CIS hybrid pitch safe rotor. If you use the TerraPlane, it tends to cut the fibers off at the surface. So that's why we chose that rotor. So we have there was a manageable amount of thatch on there. The thatch wasn't the major issue, but, that was part of the decision into why we did this process. And then we did have more power than normal, again, from the lack of using pitches. There was more power ingress, and the initial lockdown period where, again, I was looking after here and at the Vale on my own, and there was just basic maintenance because we were on minimum hours and shorter weeks, so there was a little bit more ingress in power. So the Coro helped with that process as well, to see if we can have lower power levels going into next year. So if you move on, please, John. So this is some photos of what the process looks like. So you've got the Coro on one tractor that throws up the spoil up a conveyor belt into a trailer next door, and you'll see on the picture on the right the aftermath of our hybrid pitch fibers above the surface, and then all of the grass sward is removed and all of the thatch is removed. So you're just left with a clean surface if there's no hybrid, or if it's a hybrid pitch, you're left with that amount of fiber on the top. It does slightly pull some of the fibers, which we just trim down with the mower back to the desired length. We have about 6mm of green fiber above the surface. That's how we run our hybrids. So here's another photo here of sort of what it looks like, slightly different. And you can see what the pitches that aren't hybrids look like. They're just completely clean. They've just got a few little grooves in them from where the Coro goes through them, and it leaves us a nice clean surface. We go down in 1mm implements, so we take off about 1 millimeter off the top. We actually ended up having to do it 5 times over our square to get it completely clean, because there was quite a lot of grass on there, from where it was so dense because we hadn't used it, and we had a lot of unused pitches. So we actually ended up doing 5 passes with the Coro to leave us with a perfectly clean surface. We weren't using the Coro in this instance for leveling, we were just using it for surface removal. So the overview of what the square renovations were. So we've got 26 pitches here at Taunton, 10 first class, the rest are practice pitches or net pitches. So we used 5 bags, 100 kilos of seeds at 50 grams per square meter, and we went with 8 bags of onga loam per pitch, so 200 kilos of onga buds. So it's about 5.2 tons of onga on the whole square, plus a little bit extra for the ends. Thanks, John. So after the square renovations were done by a contractor, we moved on to the outfield. So our initial intentions were to increase the sand content, reduce the thatch layer, and to try and add some surface stability. We were having quite a lot of divoting when players were turning and sliding. We were getting quite a few chunks taken out. So there was another thing that we were trying to aim for. So our initial thoughts were to hollow core, scarify, top dress to fill the holes in, overseed, and then top dress again to cover the seed. And so hollow coring takes out it impacts about 5% of the surface, depending on how close your spaces are. And scarifying your first pass is about 12%, and then it kind of about 5% is the second pass. So we weren't aiming to get rid of all of the thatch in one go, but we were aiming to try and remove as much of the thatch as we could without impacting the surface too much, increase a little bit of the sand content to help with the surface stability and just kind of smooth the surface. We weren't looking to do any major leveling at this stage. So this was what we started. So we started hollow core in the outfield and collecting, and then we started scarifying, and everything was going quite smoothly until the next slide. And then we started getting quite major chunks taken out with the scarifier. Where the 25mm thatch layer was coming apart from the soil profile, in certain areas where the thatch was quite bad, we were actually getting some quite major chunks taken out, and this was causing some stress and some headaches. But luckily, the contractor was still on site at this stage, so we had a bit of a chat about what we could do, and a decision was made for him to stay a little bit longer and to remove the 25mm thatch layer from the whole outfield. If you move on, please, John. Yeah, so as you can see, the left-hand photo, that's how much of the outfield was coming off at once, and you can just say it's the same process, tractor corro, and we actually hired a 6-ton dumper to help us speed up the process, because we only had a day and a half for him of his time available for him to do the whole outfield. Because say he was here to do a 26-metre square and ended up doing 1.3 hectares of outfield as well. So it left us with a clean surface. There you go. We actually worked on until about 10 o'clock that night. I got permission to put the lights on, and we worked till about 10 o'clock on the Friday night, and then we came back on Saturday and finished it off. So every blade of grass from the outfield in the square went, and we ended up with about 250 tons of spoil. That picture on the right is probably about a quarter of the pile that we ended up with, which ended in the car park, and wasn't the most popular person come Monday morning when everyone came back to park their cars and there was a big pile of grass in there. But once the surface was removed, if you move on, please, John, we did plan on running the seeder over there just to loosen the surface up. But the seeder hydraulic pipes broke, so we had no seeder. That happened while we were overseeding the square, so we had to use this little tractor mounted rake, which are 250 quid off eBay, just to loosen that surface. And because we had no dimple seeder to put the seed in the ground, we just put the seed into the tractor mounted fertilizer spreader and just had to throw it down, basically. So that wasn't ideal because we weren't sort of stitching it in. But we had a very short window to get this thing done, and we didn't have, and none of this was planned, so none of it was within budget. So I didn't have time or the budget available to go and hire more machines and stuff like that. So we kind of had to work with what we did. So we had 116 tons of sports sand for our initial filling the holes and then top dressing. So that wasn't allowed to order any more. So that's what we put down. So we ended up with 116 tons of sand. So that across our outfield was about 5 to 7 mil thick of sand on the top, because we then didn't fill the holes in, because we didn't hollow core the whole outfield. We only did that section you saw earlier before we stopped, on the basis that the outfield was pulling up with a scarifier. So we then put 116 tons of sand down. And that we did that on the Monday, and then on the Tuesday it just rained for the next 4 months. All the staff left the day after. So the lads we put the sand down and then they went. So I was then left to try and grow an outfield in the winter on my own, which was an interesting experience. But I say, just a sort of a brief overview of what we used. There's a little photo of what it looked like with the brown, the one at the right hand side is our outfield nets. You may or might know that they're there, and you can just see the hybrid stitching in both of those photos. I say we corrowed the whole outfield. 25 was removed. We put 500 kilos of seed on at 35 grams per square meter. Again, because the corrowing work wasn't planned, so that's as much seed as I had for my overseed, so I didn't get any additional seed in. Otherwise I would have gone at a slightly higher rate. 116 tons of sand across the whole outfield. Say 250 tons of spoil was removed into the car park. And I say after that we just had a fairly wet spell for a few months, but we did manage to get a couple of dry days in November. November was when it was cut the first time, and that's the top right hand picture of the outfield, and then the bottom right hand picture is our first cut on the square again in November time. So it did come through. It's still not perfect. The outfield's still got a few bare areas in which we've overseeded, and we just need a little bit of warmth this year to get us going. The squares is all fine. That all grew back without any major issues. I say the low spot you see there, we didn't try and level the outfield. We purely just top dressed the profile as it was there. To level the outfield is quite a big, a much larger renovation, which we didn't have planned, we didn't have time for, and we didn't have budget for. So maybe that's for next year's presentation. We might be able to do a renovation of that size. But I say that's all from me with regards to that. I hope I haven't gone over time, John. I'm sure you would have.
Scott, your challenge was 15 minutes and you've absolutely nailed 14 and a half minutes. So that's
boom.
Brilliant.
It's like I've done that before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really insightful for the 59 people on the webinar to get a sneak peek behind the scenes of your work and your challenges over COVID winter, shall we say, with no staff and several breakdowns and some contingency and thinking on your feet. I remember catching up with you a while ago and you said you had to go cap in hand to the finance director for the outfield works.
Yes, yeah, that was an awkward conversation, but I say there was some pencils sharpened by the contractor there, but we managed to get it through, luckily.
Brilliant. Scott, thank you very much for that. Just to remind everybody, we have got the chat function available. So if you've got any questions you want to pose in the chat function to either the Simon from the GMA or Dave Cobb, or questions that we might want to pick up later on, please do use the chat function. I'm going to stop sharing now and invite Ian to come back on screen if possible. So this takes us to the kind of the part of the evening, the business end of the evening, to try and pick up some of your key questions that have already been landed with us in your registration. So we've obviously got some questions which are quite similar, and I'm going to amalgamate some of the questions. Ian and Scott have seen some of the questions that are coming, but some will be off the hoof. So it's not all staged, let's put it this way. So the first question is a question from Steve from Chew Valley. Even though I seeded in the autumn, I have some bare patches in the ends. What prep do I need to do and when should I reseed? So Scott, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, so small areas can be reseeded by hand. If there's no major leveling required with soil, you can sort of just put some holes in with a fork or one of those little ferret things that Sysits make, put some seed in and try and get that seed in the ground as soon as you can, because that might come through before you pre-season roll. There's no harm in putting some seed down and then rolling it in. That will help with your seed to soil contact. It's just sort of trying to balance the time between getting that seed to germinate and then rolling, or putting it down, rolling it in and then letting it grow after you finish your pre-season rolling. So if you've got if you're putting soil in then filling ends in, low ends, then stay out of those with the roller, because that will make a hell of a mess.
And Ian, you're smiling to that comment. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, don't worry about that. I've not concentrated, rolled over it. Putting putting bits of germination sheet down in patches can help as well if you want to keep a bit of temperature in there and help the germination along. Yeah, otherwise
Right.
you're scraping mud off the roller.
Okie dokie. That was a nice one to kick you off with. We've got a bit more detail now about some questions on rolling. Martin from Winscombe and Steve from Keynsham asked quite similar questions. How much pre-season rolling do you recommend these days? And how do we optimize the use of a heavy 1-ton roller? When to do it relative to watering and when becomes too much rolling? So Ian, I think you're going to enlighten us on some of your rolling tests you've done.
Yeah, without spending hours doing it. So it's a good question about pre-season rolling. The first thing is pre-season rolling is usually worth doing. Over winter, the soil swells up, it gets frost heaved, and usually it's a good idea to put back those levels. It's also your last chance to roll really across the direction of play. So it's usually worth doing. Timing it's not a date you put in the diary as much as you get on your ground and you feel the soil, and don't go when it's too wet. So it's always better to go slightly too late than it is to go too early. If you go too early and it's too wet, you'll start to ridge the soil in front of the roller. The other tip really is to build up your weight, so it's a bit more forgiving. So you don't, if you can roll later on with a heavy roller, but it is better to build up the weight. So start off, I tend to use a rotary with a roller at the back, and then build up the weight of mowers, and then drain out my roller, get it as light as possible, start with that and build up the weight as I go. The old-fashioned Union Jack pattern is fine. So it is, as I say, your opportunity to get something across the direction of play. So you might go across 1 diagonal, 2 diagonals, and then finish in the line of play. So always finish in the line of play, and build your weight as you go. Quite often it will take a bit more weight than you think, but it's always better to be cautious. The other thing is that you can always catch up with pre-season rolling. So I don't know when your season starts. Mine tends to start towards middle of April. So I can still be doing pre-season rolling in April until the first pitches are marked in, really. And doing it late is not a problem. You can catch up. That's what the rolling trials showed. So that's a very quick tour through it. I'll if you want to get into it in a bit more detail, I'd recommend the GMA toolkit for cricket. So pre-season rolling, there's a section in there that's new as well, so it's updated. And if you want to really get into it, you can read the rolling guidelines. And if you really want to get into it, you can read Pete Shipton's PhD thesis. But that's serious depth of rolling.
Okay, Ian, that's great. So we're going to include the links to the GMA toolkit page in the chat function, hopefully in a minute. Right. And also it will be in the notes and follow-up. Just in follow-up to that, Ian, we had a question today come in around number of hours of pre-season rolling. Is there a set number of hours per pitch, or rule of thumb that you can share with the guys tonight?
Yeah, what I would do is avoid going by hours. Look at the number of passes that you do. And one of the key, so we did this survey right at the beginning of the rolling trials, which was how many hours do people spend rolling? And there was a huge variation. There was some people out there spending 90 hours rolling. Suspect they were avoiding something at home. But the key thing is the number of passes. So what we found was, after you've done about 4 passes, everything after that was a waste of time because it didn't compact the soil anymore. And it's better to let the soil dry out a bit, create a bit more room for air, and then it's that air that you compress in the soil when you go again. So so what I tend to do is I might do 4 passes across the square, or I might get to across the square and back again, something like that. Then I'd leave it, and then the next day or the next 2 days later, I'd come back and do the diagonal, leave it, do the other diagonal, leave it, and then do the inline and leave it. It's the gaps in between rolling are as important as the rolling itself, but go by number of passes rather than hours spent, because we all roll at different speeds anyway.
Okay, and there's been a live question in the chat function tonight, is how do we gauge whether it's too wet to roll?
Yeah, too wet to roll. Good indicators are if you're leaving footprints behind, it's too wet. The old adage of you can stick your thumb in, if you can just about get your thumb in, then it's about ready to go. But if it's too soft, you'll know it's too soft when you crease it and you can't roll that out. Obviously that's a bit too late. So it's a bit of feel and experience. But if you can stick your thumb in and it goes in easily, it's too soft. But if it's just taking a thumbprint, it's about right. I don't know if Scott has a rule of thumb for deciding when to go.
So we use the thumb test as well. We don't go with the moisture meters or anything like that. We kind of go on what we see, what we feel, and sort of and a little bit of the thumb test as well. And so we pretty much roll the same as what your trials suggest. We start off with pedestrian cylinder mowers, and then we get the larger outfield cylinder, the 36-inch cylinder mower across it in the 4 directions, and then we use the blotter as our light roller, and then we move on to our heavy roller after that. So because we're covering so early, because we started covering the 24th of January this year. 24th of January, I look at my calendar. Might have been earlier than that. 22nd of January we started covering. So we had areas that were covered that were further along the pre-season rolling, and the uncovered areas were are slightly behind. So we're still kind of catching up with that now. So the only thing I would suggest is you can always brush the square between rolls just to get that grass stood up. We don't want to be rolling the grass into the surface. So we would cut, brush as we build up the weight, and then every time we roll, we'd brush the whole square with a drag brush or even the little Sisis brush just to get the grass to stand up. We want that up as much as we can.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Lots of content there, and like I say, we'll include the link to the GMA toolkit in the chat function if we can, Matt, and also it'll be in the follow-up notes. Question 3 from David at Kilmington and Stourton. Is it useful to aerate the square during March if conditions allow, and when should the first fertilizer application take place in spring?
I might pick up on the aeration one if I can. Generally, one of the things the aeration trials showed is you don't really want to spike on what we call a drying curve. So if your soil is going to get drier, which it tends to do from February onwards, don't go spiking, because what will happen is you'll make holes that then shrink as the soil dries, and then you'll get cracks going hole to hole like the edge of a postage stamp. So try and avoid, there's no real benefit in spiking that late. I would tend to spike on what we call a wetting curve, which is as the soil is getting wetter. So from the end of the season, obviously it's a bit hard to get the spiker in, so wait, otherwise you're paying your dentist a lot. And then let it get wetter to the point where you can just get it in. That's the best time to spike, and allow the winter weather to get into the soil, open it and work for you. And then try to avoid spiking once your soil is starting to dry out, which hopefully it is now. Scott, I don't know if you add to that or pick up the fertilizer maybe.
Yeah, so we tend to spike the square once a year. We try and go deep and once with a Verti-Drain or Wiedemann type spiker. We don't do the little and often approach, and we definitely wouldn't spike in March. We're playing cricket in March. So fertilizer wise, I would go again. It's no, don't fertilize on this day or do fertilize on that day. You'll be led by temperature, weather conditions, and what your square is telling you. Just having a look and seeing the color of the grass, and for any disease or anything like that, that will tell you whether or not it's hungry and needs a feed. Saying if the weather's in your favor, then you can put your fertilizer applications down. We feed all year. We spoon feed all through the winter, little and often. So we don't. We're not holding off and trying to do it now. All I'd say is don't put your fertilizer down in the morning and roll in the afternoon. That would be bad.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. We're going to take a break from the questions just very quickly, and we're just going to launch another poll because we want to hear from you guys around your outfields. So what work do you do with your outfields? None, cut only, cut and fertilizer, cut, fertilizer and weed management, or the full shooting match, cut, fertilizer, wheat management, scarify and overseed. So we'll just hold that open for another 5 to 10 seconds. And this will enable us to get some really good data and insight to what you guys within Somerset and further afield do to your outfield. So brilliant, Matt, if we could close the poll, stop the poll there, and then show the results. Brilliant. So cut only 38%, equaled with cut, fertilizer and weed management. 10% are saying none. And then we have 14% saying that they do what we'd call the full Monty and the full program throughout the for the outfield. So thank you very much for that. So we'll jump back to the questions. We're going to move to a question from Ian from Whitchurch. Is there a particular height of cut you would recommend for the square in the early season? Scott, I think that one's coming to you.
Say, at the moment, our square is being cut at 17 mil on areas that we're still pre-season rolling. We cut through the winter between 21 and 23. We've cut a little bit longer this year, one, because of the wet winter, so we haven't been able to get on as much as we'd like to, as often as we'd like. So we've not been taking, it's been getting longer, and then we've been taking it down to 23, so we're not taking too much off. I would caveat everything with the 1/3 rule, so don't take more than a third of the leaf off in one pass. But say we're at about 17, and then we'll drop the square down to 15 towards the start of the season, and then once the games start, we'll cut the square at 12 mil. But we're around 17 for pre-season rolling, but we do brush to stand it up as much as we can, and that also helps with, dew, disease, and it has so many benefits brushing. We are always doing some form of brushing, but to answer that question, about 17 mil.
Okay, great. And Ian, putting you on the spot, Olney Cricket Club, pre-season cut.
My biggest challenge is the grass that grows under the ski Sunday netting around the square. That's always the bit that gets hacked more, but something similar. He says it's number 3 on the mower on the rotary, and it'll go down to number 2 this weekend, and I'll just keep dropping it to a height where I know I don't want it too long, because then it'll open out the sward. So if I can keep it short without stressing it, it's certainly not summer cut height at the moment. A bit of leaf under the roller is actually a good thing. It helps hold the soil together as you roll.
Great, brilliant. So obviously we've got community grounds people with us this evening, and we're going to merge 2 questions together, to be fair. Tom from Cheddar and Jeff from Churchill. In the real world of local cricket of limited time and machinery, what would be the top 2 priorities for preparing the square for the season? And then coupled with equipment is always limited, interested what can be done with minimal kit. So if we can amalgamate those 2 questions around limited time, limited machinery, what would be your kind of takeaway advice?
I don't know. I live in that world of limited time and limited machinery. It's probably not 2 things, but 3 things. So cutting, obviously, watering and rolling is probably the 3 things that if you can focus on getting those right, it's having enough time to water and having enough time to let that water sink in before you go into your rolling, spending enough time rolling, but that's an area where you can waste lots of time. So get that optimized and getting your cutting right. If you can frequently cut, if you're cutting with a well set mower and it's sharpened, all of these things, I know the sharpening costs a bit of money, but setting your mower up right, setting your roller up right, running the roller, running the water, don't cost too much, but they make the biggest difference to pitch performance. If you want to keep it to 3, if you want to keep it to 4, raking out your thatch and keeping your sward, your surface clean is the other one. Scott, I don't know.
So I'd agree with those 3-4 points there. Working on limited budget's all about being inventive. It's about sort of stretching what you can and seeing what you can come up with. Freebies out there. There's different ways of buying stuff. We've got the new procurement from the SGA, which may save clubs a little bit of money on their materials. Saying there's just about getting the basics right and and being as inventive you can. There's loads and loads of webinars out there, from, I watched them all. I've watched one on Twickenham last week, and, I've watched one on Club Groundsmanship from Gloucester at the weekends, so there's loads of ways of learning, loads of people to talk to, loads of resources of how different people are doing different things on very limited budgets. And there's always a deal to be had. There's always somebody trying to sell something somewhere.
And I guess I pose a question to the chat function. Those on the webinar, if you've got any examples where you've made DIY pieces of kit that you could share within the chat function, I'm sure other people would love to learn what you've mechanically made, created out of brushes, drag mats, etc. So if you've got any examples, or even better, we know Groundsman have got lots of pictures. So if you've got pictures you can share in the chat function, if that's possible, that'd be great. Thanks for that, guys. Question 6 comes from Stuart from Ninehead. A club, any specific tips on preparation and pre-season prep for a club without covers? So a club doesn't have any covers at the moment. Any tips or advice you can give Stuart at Ninehead?
So I've had one single flat sheet cover for a few years, and before that we did it without any covers at all. Roll-on covers are coming this year, so that'll be a new thing for me. But generally, it's about timing things and not pushing it too hard. Generally, I know it's hard, but the weather generally does get better as the further into the year that we get. Now that's me tempting fate. Welcome to the wettest spring on record, and I've said that. But generally, it's about waiting for the right time. So if you're like me and you don't have whole square covers, then don't go on too early. Just wait. It will drain. What also happens as it gets warmer is you get more of that evapotranspiration that takes water out of the profile. So looking after your grass is your best way of drying your profile, because that's what pumps it out. It's not easy. You have to watch and wait, but likewise, you don't have to take covers on and off every day like Scott does. I presume when it's dry, he's got to have them off, and when it's going to be wet again, he has to put them back on. So when you're working on a club ground with one or two people, it's just about working with the weather, because you can't work against it. Don't know what you'd say, Scott. And
so you've covered most of it again
sorry,
there, Ian. No, that's fine. I say it's sometimes it's best to do nothing. Trying to force stuff in the wrong conditions, you'll cause yourself more work, do more damage. And sometimes it's best just to sit on your hands, and don't be guided by the calendar, be guided by the weather, and be guided by what you see and what you feel when you're on your grounds. It's just, you see people on Twitter doing pre-season rolling, doesn't mean I've got to go and start the roll up. If it's too wet where you are, then don't do it, and vice versa. Don't be afraid to start if it is ready, because no one else has. Say it's all based on conditions, weather, and just do what you say. Like Ian says, don't fight against it. Work with it.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. We're going to jump to our last question. Well, not question 7. Then we'll go to another poll. Interestingly, football have announced recently that they're going to extend their playing season. So we've got a question come in. We play on a multi-sports ground. Because of the lockdown, the footballers want to play some postponed matches in April when organised sport is permitted once more. We would like to do some pre-season ground preparation in April. Will the playing of football be detrimental to our ground preparation? And if so, what can we do to mitigate any damage? So that might be a challenge for a number of our clubs who have got shared outfields.
Yeah, I have that. I don't know if you can see in the background, there's some rugby posts just over the back. We have mini rugby over half the outfield and junior football on the other half. It's an unusual year, this one. So football season's being extended because of COVID. And it depends whether you're talking about adults or kids. So generally kids are easier to manage because they make less damage. So it will come down to the agreements you've got with different sports clubs, using a multi-purpose site as to who gets priority. I want to see the kids playing as much sport as possible. So a lot of our kids who play cricket will be playing mini rugby, or they'll be playing junior football, or all three. So it's the same kids. I will try and help them do that, but it's things like colour of line marking. It's about making sure it's safe to play cricket on the outfield, that it's not getting too cut up. Other things you can do, as I said, I've got, I call it ski Sunday netting, but the hazard, it comes in orange, but we tend to buy it in green to blend it in a bit, the hazard netting. I have that up to keep the footballs off. Doesn't work so well with the rugby balls, but keep the footballs off, just so that there's less foot traffic over your wet square. And then it's just about timing of managing machines around kids and things like this. It's a case by case one. I'll leave it to you to decide whether how much multi-sport you want to entertain, but it's got to be safe to play cricket on. That's the only thing, because the ball's rolling across the floor, not being hoofed or bounced along the floor. So that's what you need to work with. But if you communicate, generally I find that works best.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt, we're going to quickly launch our final poll of the evening. And it's around budget and your budgets you're dealing with this year. So what is your agreed budget for ground maintenance and end of year, including end of year renovations? Not yet confirmed. 0 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1,500, and the sliding scale down. So it's good to see some budgets already confirmed. Some conversations with committee obviously still to be had, and some good numbers as well. It's good to see that there's some healthy budget being allocated to both in-season maintenance and end of season. So Matt, if we could stop the poll. Brilliant, thank you very much. Scott, one for you, definitely one for you. Nick from Catterstock Cricket Club, producing a firm bouncy wicket with good carry eludes us despite long hot summers and last season. What would you recommend?
I would say moisture management is probably key here. There's probably a layer of thatch in there, adding to the mix there. But I say all pitches, it's all about moisture management. That's it's about making sure that it's not too wet and not too dry. And long hot summers with no covers. Remember, covers aren't there just to keep rain out. We can use covers to keep moisture in. It's quite a lot of time that we would water and then cover in the evenings to keep that moisture in overnight, so then it doesn't all just dissipate and evaporate in the heat. So you've got the choices of trying to use a bit, trying to increase how much moisture you're putting in and then drying it out a little bit slower with the use of covers. You can also experiment with heights of cut. So it might sound a bit scary to some, but our 4-day pitches are played on 10 mil and our T20s are played on 9. So we try and get as much, leave as much grass on as we can in order to keep the pace and keep the carry in. So then we have a dry, hard surface underneath, which gives us the bounce. So think about adjusting your heights of cut potentially. Just, it doesn't always have to be as low as the mower goes. Sometimes that doesn't produce the best wicket. Sometimes over rolling as well. If you're rolling in conditions that are too dry, that could also kill some of the pace. So there's days that a couple of days before we might go from the heavy roller down to the light roller just to, just sort of help with the final tickling of the pitch. So it's, if you're not getting the results you want, try something different, talk about but then I would focus most on moisture management and when and how much you're rolling.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Ian, anything to add on Scott's very thorough answer?
Short of getting in bigger, taller, faster bowlers.
Brilliant, okay. We've got an outfield question, and it's a drainage question from Dave Marsh from Congresbury. What drainage would you advise on a very heavy clay outfield and cricket square on a low-lying land?
Oh, that's a good challenge. Actually, when we designed the drainage for Taunton, it's not heavy clay soil, but low-lying and low-lying relative to the river is important. What you always need with a drainage scheme is an outfall. So you need somewhere for the water to go. At Taunton, it's pumped out and goes into the river. So if you have a water course nearby, in heavy clay soil, if somebody's saying to you, oh, you can just dig a soak away, then don't pay heed to that, because it doesn't soak away. You end up with a big wet puddle that never drains again. So there are lots of elements to good drainage design. Bear in mind, I used to be a consultant designing drainage, but I would say this, but it pays to get good advice with drainage, because the spacing of the drains, the size of the drains, the depth of the drains, what you backfill them with, how you backfill them, good contractors, timing the works are all critical to draining heavy clay outfields. What I would say though is, before you do any of that, get yourself a spade, dig a spade depth hole, and check that you haven't got 25 millimeters of thatch or a very compact soil, because a lot of outfields have been the poor cousin of their squares, and they tend to have been rolled at pre-season to make them flat, which compacts the soil, and they tend to have quite high thatch contents, as Scott was testifying to earlier. And if you have, particularly in a clay soil, if you have that spongy thatch on top and a compacted soil underneath, getting rid of the thatch or controlling the thatch and dealing with the compaction with a verti-drain will be the most cost effective to improve your drainage to a point. But when it's very wet, it will sit wet because it's clay soils, and that's the point where you need drainage. So start with the simple things first. Get a spade out, dig a hole, see if you compact, see if you've got thatch, and deal with that, because it's less cost than the drainage, that's for sure.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. I wanted to pose a question in the chat functions, because we're coming to the end of the webinar. It's 25 minutes past 8. We've got a couple more slides to go through with Ian around COVID maintenance management on site and the GMA toolkit. But a question from me in the chat function, please. This is our first of a series of webinars that the Grounds Association wish to do this summer. So open question to you guys as viewers this evening. What other topics would you like us to consider to cover with material for you in future webinars? If you could just pop some ideas in the chat function, and then we've got a really good straw poll of what you guys would like to hear and need to want to learn. So please pop that in the chat function as you can. We do have a number of other questions, and I'm just going to pick a couple very quick ones. We're going to do 60-second speed round, bit of a quiz show. These, I think, have come in today from a lot of our Cornish clubs, because we've got a lot of Cornish clubs registering today. Quick fire, 60 seconds. First question, and don't mind who answers, okay? How to get rid of Chaffer grubs?
Chaffer grubs take away their food source, which is the thatch.
Okay, Ian, anything to add?
No.
Okay.
There are lots of things to add, but not in 60 seconds.
Okay. What is the optimum pH level for the square and the outfield?
Depending on your grass, 6.5 to 7-ish pH, I'd say, but it's usually driven by your soil type anyway, so don't battle it. Okay,
I'm not preempting this one, Scott. Have you found any successful treatments for leather jackets?
No successful treatments. Again, leather jackets feed on thatch, so it's manage your thatch levels. That I haven't. If I found one, I would tell you, but I don't. I've got the same problem.
People try sweating them out by putting covers on the field.
Yeah,
if it sweats them out. I've not tried it myself, but I've seen scenes that look like Hitchcock's The Birds, where I've been sampling Chaffer grubs in this case, turn around and there's a crow eating my sample. By the time I've had the chance to count it, it can be a real problem. I do feel for those who've got them.
And last question, Scott, what's the best advice starting my first year as a cricket groundsman?
Speak to as many groundsmen as you can, get as much, seek as much advice as you can, and sort of use the GMA toolkit, use YouTube, use these webinars, and just speak to people. That's how I started, and I just went around and asked as many questions, be a badger, and gather all that knowledge.
Brilliant. That's a little bit more than 60 seconds, but really good. Thanks, guys. Scott and I are going to jump off screen, and we're going to leave Ian for a couple of slides. So hopefully this will work. He says.
Don't need to explain that, do I?
No, I don't think so. There we are.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, John. Just a bit on COVID. So maintenance is permitted under COVID. So you can go and maintain your cricket grounds. It needs a COVID risk assessment. So you need to work out where are the transmission risks and a plan for controlling them. Things like hand sanitizer, wiping down kit, not working within 2 meters of each other. You might want to wear a mask in and around the shed, that kind of thing. So proceed on that basis, so you can do it. Cricket facilities themselves in the recreational game remain closed until 29th of March. So there shouldn't be people in your nets anyway. It's a good opportunity to get on top of your ground, so take it, but don't do it with lots of people. So keep numbers to a minimum, because we're still under lockdown, still under work at home where possible. So no big pre-season working parties like you might normally have in a normal year. Keep that until ideally after the 29th, when working in small groups might be more appropriate. But until then, just if you can, work in 1s, 2s, that kind of number, and just put it off until later when things start to open up. That's what I'd like to just sort of get across on that. John, did you want me to just talk about the toolkit as well? So these links I think have been posted in the chat bar. Would really encourage you to have a look at the New Grounds GMA toolkit. So we've been working with the GMA to improve some of the content on there. So we started with pre-season, anticipating just talks like tonight. So there's new information up there on pre-season rolling, cutting, etc., spiking as well. And go and have a look. And as we move through the season, we're bringing out new information all the time. So I would encourage you to keep looking. So it's out there, it's free to use. The ECB are right behind it with the GMA. Encourage you to have a look, and always welcome to have some feedback on it too. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Ian. We've had a question come in the chat function just quickly around marking out of squares and creases and more end of season renovation details. That can all be found on the toolkit. There's a big section in that on marking out of squares and setting out squares. So have a look in the resources section of that. Jens, I'm just going to stop sharing and bring us back to life. That's 8:30. That concludes our first webinar of the Grounds Association for Somerset this year. Thank you ever so much for your time, efforts, insight and knowledge. And thanks for taking the time just to share that with us this evening. I hope probably to invite you back to maybe a future webinar and have a bit more from you in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. Really enjoyed that. Let's hopefully see you in the next one.
So, ladies and gents, thank you very much for signing in. Have a safe evening. Enjoy your pre-season prep, and hopefully post 29th of March, we'll look forward to some decent community cricket. So that concludes the webinar. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you very soon.
Have a good season all.
Good luck.